Everyone, it's 3 o'clock. My name is Pam Steinbach. We're going to get started. I'm the director of planning for DelDOT, and I just I'm going to be handing it over to Todd Previs, who is our director of tech and innovation, just to go over some technical items as part of the Council on Transportation meeting. And Secretary we do have quorum, so, and just to let you know. Go ahead, Todd, thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome. We will be taking questions and comments from the public on today's Council of Transportation, and our focus will be on the 2023 to 2028 CTP. In order to maintain proper order, we request that you please raise your hand to ask a question or make a comment. We also ask that everybody please stay on mute if you're not speaking. To raise your hand, look for the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. If you're dialed in by phone only, you can also press *9 to raise your hand. Keep in mind, in this scenario, we won't know your name, so we'll identify you by your phone number when we call on you. If dialed in, you can also please press *6 to unmute yourself. If you'd prefer to use the chat function to type a question or comment, feel free. It will be turned on during our public comment segment. Lastly, you can view live captioning by clicking the associated button at the bottom of your screen. And with that lengthy set of instructions, I will turn it over to you, Cabinet Secretary Majewski.
Should be Todd, please. 1 second. I do want to call the meeting to order, but also want to make sure that everybody recognizes we do have a quorum. And present in person is myself, Ted Williams, Chair of the Council on Transportation, and Tom Holmes, a member. And virtually, we have Marty Lessner, Bobby Pfeiffer, John Gilbert, and Pam Scott. So we do have a quorum. So thank you, Madam Secretary.
All right, thank you, everyone. Can everyone see my screen? Can I get the thumbs up from somebody in the Delaware room to make sure everything is good? Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Majewski, Secretary of DelDOT. Just wanted to start off the presentation with obviously our mission to provide excellence in transportation, every trip, every mode, every dollar, and everyone. Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want to do the approval of the minutes first.
What's given to us was our minutes from our December 8th meeting. Those in person have a copy in front of them. I'd entertain a motion to have the minutes of our December 8th meeting approved. I have a motion by Mr. Holmes.
I second him, Scott.
The second by Ms. Scott. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Mr. Gilbert, Pam, everybody, I didn't hear anybody else speak.
Yes.
Yes.
Aye. Okay, the motion passes. Back to you, Madam Secretary.
All right. Again, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the council for being with us today. I do want to provide an update for you all. I'm going to talk a little bit about safety. I'm going to talk about our proposed fiscal year 22 budget. We had our JFC hearing a few weeks ago, so I'm going to give you an overview of what the Transportation Trust Fund is going to look like for fiscal year 23, and then also just talk. We'll go into the fiscal year, the draft 23 to 28 CTP and the effects that the bipartisan infrastructure bill is going to have on that program. So I am going to start on a very somber note. What you've seen this slide before from us. What this is the chart of our roadway fatalities. This is the summary that we saw for last year. So we had 139 roadway fatalities last year. It was the most that we've had in the last 15 years. You will also see the comparison to look at 2019, kind of pre-pandemic, where we were at 133, and then in 2020 at 117. So to have 139 fatalities on our roadways is completely unacceptable, and something that is at the forefront of all of our minds on what we can do to prevent these roadway fatalities from occurring. You'll see the breakdown that we have by person type and by crash type. We've seen a significant increase in motorcycle fatalities, pedestrian fatalities, and then vehicle occupant fatalities. And then you see the different types of crashes listed there as well. Even to date, we are not even 2 months into 2022, and we've had 26 fatalities on our roadways. And a significant number of those have been under the age of 18. So again, this is at the forefront of every member of the DelDOT family right now. Safety is our top priority, but to have these many fatalities is completely unacceptable. And you all have heard us talk repeatedly about the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. This is essentially our roadmap on how we are trying to make the roads in our state safer. It is a multifaceted program. It includes all of our stakeholders. It incorporates the increase in education and our work with the Office of Highway Safety. It includes increase in enforcement and our partnership with law enforcement and the Department of Safety and Homeland Security. And from an engineering standpoint, every single project that we do has a safety component involved in it. But we also are investing hundreds of millions of dollars in standalone pedestrian and roadway safety projects as well. You'll hear a little bit more about that later, but this again at the forefront, but we need everyone's help in this. We have seen an increase in speeding, in aggressive driving, and distracted driving that is leading to many of these fatalities. And so again, this is just my PSA for everyone to slow down, to drive attentively. And then, again, this is we need everyone's help in order to reduce these fatalities.
Madam Secretary, I have a question
sir.
on that. And that is, do we have a breakdown of how many of the active fatalities are caused or something that DelDOT can cure, make a safer road, make a pedestrian path, and how many of them are attributed to, you mentioned law enforcement, like their DUIs. They are aggressive drivers who might, slow down if they know a speed trap is there. How much of this is something that DelDOT can do something about versus more law enforcement on the traffic side?
So we analyze every single fatality that occurs. And we look at all the different components. What was the road rate type? What was the classification? Was there a curb? Was there lighting? What were all the geographical and engineering components of the roadway that take into account? And then we rely on law enforcement for their analysis of and witness testimony of, was there aggressive driving? Were the occupants restrained properly? Was there DUI? And so we do have that information. We're happy to share that breakdown, but that is a team effort between Office of Highway Safety, law enforcement, and us doing that complete analysis. But what I can tell you is that we're seeing a number of it's kind of across the board. We've seen increase attributed to speeding. So when you see the median crossover or roadway departure, in most cases, that is attributed to somebody not being able to navigate the roadway because they are driving excessively at an excessive speed. And we've seen an increase in that. We've seen an increase in unrestrained occupants, people who are not properly wearing seatbelts. There's been, there have been DUIs. There's been the whole kind of gamut of, there is not one single thing that we can point to say this is the single problem. It is multifaceted, but we can provide that breakdown.
You said there were meetings with law enforcement. Is there some committee that sits down and discusses this and figures out a game plan here? Like we should have speed traps here, or we should put up a stronger barrier so that we don't get a crossover. Is there like an organized committee that sits down and goes over this data and comes up with a game plan?
Yeah, there is a stakeholder group that is comprised of all those people that we just discussed. DelDOT Traffic Engineering, Office of Highway Safety, DSP, that are doing this analysis. There's the stakeholder group that actually was created through the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, and that's exactly what they're doing.
Are these formal meetings or informal gatherings, or what? Or is there minutes or a game plan?
I don't know if there's formal minutes, but I know that there's a stakeholder group that is meeting to review all of these crashes and to review, again, the implementation of the plan itself. Now, there was is there we had a meeting just the other day with the Sunset Committee talking specifically about pedestrian fatalities. And one of the things we talked about was, is there a formal review board that views, that looks at each fatality and does kind of that analysis of it. There isn't a formal review board in a sense that that for other kind of fatalities that occur outside of vehicles on roadways, but there is this stakeholder group that is looking at, doing these analysis, mapping these fatalities out, trying to figure out, what was the underlying cause, and what improvements could be done from an engineering standpoint, or is it an enforcement standpoint?
Okay, I'll raise the issue later, but we're having these problems on the Bike Council. I am on the Council of Transportation. I'm the designated representative on the Delaware Bike Council. And one of our missions is bike safety. And we're included on this chart as bicycle safety. And we have had a lot of problems getting the data so that we can sit down as a group and analyze it and figure out what the game plan is going forward. And so if there's a comparable group that's doing this at DelDOT and interfacing with law enforcement, I would like to be part of that as in both my role on the Council of Transportation and my role as the council's designee on the Bike Council.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to Transportation Trust Fund funding here. All right, so as I mentioned, we were just before the Joint Finance Committee a few weeks ago to present our fiscal year 23 budget. And so you are all familiar with these two charts that I'm about to show. This is the sources of funds. So what you'll see here, this is the major breakdown of our funds, our revenues into the trust fund. Obviously, DMV revenues, tolls, and motor fuel tax are our three main revenue sources. You will see DMV is leading the charge there at 23%, tolls at about 20%, and motor fuel tax at about 14%. What you'll also see here is the use of about $43 million in the stimulus money that we've received from Federal Highways and FTA over the last 2 years. We are also, you'll see here, our federal funding has been increased to $325 million. Now, typically that allocation is about 250, but we have reflected the anticipated increase in revenue that we are going to see through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which I will go into more detail about that in just a minute. The other is the bond proceeds. We will go to bond market later this year to sell about $200 million worth of bonds. So just over $1 billion program for fiscal year 23. And then how we're going to spend that money, the bulk of it will go towards the capital program. We will have a $610 million capital program for fiscal year 23, which is by far one of the largest capital programs that we've had in some time. The rest of the funding is broken down by DTC and DelDOT operations, and then our debt service payment. US 301, because this is funded separately, we have the Fta funding and its own toll revenue source. So we anticipate about $23.7 million in toll revenue for next fiscal year. The breakdown of that, obviously the majority goes to pay the debt service of the road, $3 million for operations, and then $5.1 million will go into the toll stabilization count. Once, I think you're all familiar, we're just at about $20 million in the toll stabilization count. Once we hit 35 million, then we start splitting the revenue between the trust fund and then paying the Fta payment. So we anticipate that to be at about 2026. We'll say that while I think we all saw the decrease in traffic over the last 2 years with the pandemic, we are seeing the rebound in traffic now. Newcastle County is still slightly down, which is just, it's still that 95 corridor is still slightly down, but we have seen a rebound in traffic on the 301 road as well.
A quick question on the bonds. Is the bond issuance new in that I know we went out to the market for bonds to raise the money
Yes.
to pay 301, and it's going to be paid back through the revenue through the toll revenue.
Correct.
Is the going to the market for the new bonds payment guaranteed just by general revenue, or is there a source tied to that?
So the general fund, the bonds that I just talked about, the $200 million that will go to bond market later this year, that is just that's through the trust fund. That is to pay for the capital program itself. So that is completely separate from 301.
Right.
That's
Right.
our normal bond market sale.
And we say normal. Have we gone to the bond market recently other than 301, or is this something new?
We went to the bond market, I believe, I want to say, was it last year or 2020? I'm looking, I think Dawn is in the room there.
October 2020, Nicole.
Thank you. 2020 was the last time we went to bond market. We are scheduled to go every 3 years to about $75 million in bond proceeds. We're going to advance that, and we're actually going to increase it to 200 million so that we have the state match to complement the increase in federal infrastructure funding.
So I guess the question is, if we're getting a lot of federal infrastructure money,
Correct.
doesn't that obviate the need to go out to the bond market and to
No,
borrow?
because you
additional
need the
funds?
state money to match the increase in federal funding that you're going to have.
That's the way it works. It's
Yes.
it's all, the money comes through, but it's all matching funds.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Oops, sorry. So this chart you're all familiar with. This is kind of the look back in the three main revenue sources that we've had, and then the forecast going ahead. You'll see the dip that we took through the pandemic, the recovery that we're at. 2023, we do anticipate to have those revenues back, kind of exceeding where we were at pre-pandemic level. So returning back to kind of where we were before. We do still project the slight increase in all three. I will say, used car sales have increased substantially, and that has attributed a lot to the DMV revenue that we've seen. Understand the chip shortage, new car sales, but we do anticipate, we're constantly watching that revenue line, but do feel as though we've got a solid projection there. All right, so moving into the draft CTP for 23 to 28. The overall program, I believe that what we brought to you a few months ago was the around $4.1 billion. So that has now been increased to the 4.45, almost 4.5 billion, because we are now attributing that additional revenue that we anticipate from the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And I will explain how we're going to apply that into the CTP over the next 6 years. The breakdown by county, 2.3 billion will be spent in Newcastle County, 787 million in Kent County, and then over 1.3 billion will be spent in Sussex County. You are all familiar with the 13 new projects that we are proposing to add into the CTP. These have not changed from what you have seen previously. So for Newcastle County, we have the port area truck parking facility. For Kent County, the Brentford Road project, Garrison Oak Connector Road, the Irish Hill Road upgrades. Pam and her team provided extensive detail on each of these projects the last time in the fall, and then went through the public hearing process. And then again, in Sussex County, there is a number of projects that we're adding here, a lot along that 113 corridor. Again, none of that has changed from what you previously had seen. So to explain the impacts that the infrastructure funding that we're going to see under the new bipartisan infrastructure bill. So we'll see about a $480 million increase over the next 5 years in our highways and special programs line, and about $56.5 million in additional funding over the next 5 years. So again, this about, just over $500 million of additional federal funding will be spread out over the 5 years. So as you all know, we already receive an allocation from the federal government each year. As I mentioned, that allocation is usually around $250 million that we use for our capital program. Our capital projects are typically funded 80% federal, 20% state. So there is a match requirement to that federal funding. So this is an increase that we're going to see to that regular annual allocation that we usually see. So again, we went from that 250 million to 325 million is what we're allocating for each year. And I'm going to show you, this is just the highway funding and special programming funding. So you'll see the allocation that we have for 2021, and then how that will increase over the next 5 years between the new apportion program. So that's our just standard federal highway apportionment that's being increased. And then the special appropriations, which I'll break down for you here in a second, that increase on top of that. And then the FTA funding for federal transit, our base apportionment where we currently are at, and then that base plus the increase in our annual apportionment. And again, this is over the next 5 years. So these are kind of the new buckets, if you will, of funding that we're going to see here as a state. And I will break each of these down for you in a little bit more detail. So new CTP funding. So in our CTP, there'll now be a line item for what is called EV charging. So new formula funding that each state DOT is receiving is funding for the installation of electric vehicle charging stations throughout our state infrastructure. And so we're going to receive 17.7 million over the next 5 years. So that's a breakdown of about 3.5 million each year for the deployment of these EV charging stations. So our new team here at DelDOT, led by Jim Pappas, the Transportation Resiliency and Sustainability section, is working with our stakeholders and our state partners at DENREC to develop our implementation plan on how we are going to be deploying this new technology statewide. And so that implementation plan is due to USDOT later this summer. But again, what we've done is just kind of created the new line in the CTP for that 3.5 million that we know we'll have for this new dedicated formula funding. The other new program funding.
Excuse me, Madam Secretary, on the EVV, the charging stations are, that's going to be limited to state-owned properties, or is there opportunities that those facilities can be placed on private properties, such as large office complexes or places where you have a large number of employers?
So we're still working through those details, but they have to be accessible for the public to be able to use.
Understand, but I mean, if you had a parking lot that is open to the public, or a commercial center like Christiana Mall or someplace like that, that would still be a possibility.
We're looking through the criteria, the guides. They have issued guidance that we're responding to. So we're again still trying to figure out all the rules around it. But if that's a possibility, that's definitely on the table.
And one last question about how many per year do you think you'll be able to add?
Don't know yet. We don't know yet. But again, it's about 3.5 million that we will have through this program.
Thank you.
So the other new CTP program funding, if you will, is called Protect. Again, this falls under that resiliency and sustainability section. This is really going to be looking at, we're able to use this funding for the planning for resiliency projects, for community resiliency evacuation routes, at-risk coastal infrastructure. I think if you haven't heard me say it before, Delaware is the lowest lying state in the nation, and we have seen the impacts of sea level rise and climate change on our state. We have over $1 billion of existing infrastructure that is at risk of sea level rise and of the climate changes that we've seen. So Jim and his team are basically creating a prioritization process similar to the prioritization process that we use for the rest of the capital program, on determining, where the need, we know the need is statewide and it's massive, but he's taking those projects and prioritizing them. But we anticipate we'll have $48.5 million to spend over the next 5 years. So the breakdown will be just under $10 million each year for these resiliency projects to combat sea level rise and climate change. So more to come on that. We don't have a list of projects yet. You're just going to see a line item in the CTP for the funding. The other is carbon reduction. So about $27.1 million over the next 5 years. So again, just roughly around that $5 million mark. These are going to be projects to reduce transportation emissions and develop carbon reduction strategies. We will be working with the MPOs to develop this carbon reduction strategy as per the guidance from US DOT on that. So don't have specific projects yet, but again, we know we programmed the line item for the funding to occur. Increased funding for the bridge program. This is again a new formula funding that each DOT is going to get. So for us, we will receive $45 million each year for the next 5 years for the dedicated bridge rehabilitation program. So what we have identified, and this is reflective in the draft CTP, is we already have a bridge line item in our CTP, and we have been funding that bridge program through other federal funding. And now that we have a dedicated funding source that's specific for the bridge program, we're obviously using that money to fund it. But we are able to advance a number of projects that are listed here that were programmed in our outer years in the CTP. We're able to bring them forward to hopefully start a few of them this federal fiscal year, but for the 23 fiscal year, be able to bring this list of projects forward to start that working a lot faster.
I'm Secretary. I have a
Sure.
question on these last two. If you have an intermodal bridge, an intermodal path, does it fall under the carbon reduction or the bridge program? And I give you an example. There's a bridge across the Brandywine in Wilmington that was damaged, and it's currently out. It connects Alapocas Woods, and it's currently out because it was damaged. It's closed. And as far as jurisdiction over to fix it, it seems to be I'm gonna say a DENREC project, a two-year, $2 million project. I don't know whether the Department of Transportation is involved in this. Much the same way when the 495 bridge was damaged, there was funding that went into fixing that bridge. Is a type of bridge like that, I call it an intermodal bridge that people use to commute by bike. Is that something that falls under the carbon reduction or the bridge program?
So I think we are, it is to be determined on what will qualify under the carbon reduction program. But we have been able to use federal funding in the past under the CMAQ, which is kind of, again, along the lines of carbon reduction, to use that on some pedestrian facilities. So the idea, obviously, you're reducing emissions because you're getting people to bike and to walk as opposed to being in a vehicle. And so we've made the argument and been able to use that funding for projects like that. So there is the potential that what you're talking about, if it is state owned and maintained, DelDOT maintained, because I'm not sure what I got from what you just said, if it was DENREC's project or ours, it could potentially be eligible for that carbon reduction program itself. Okay. And then the overall, allocation that we receive, our FHWA formula, and this is formula that we receive every year. That formula will be increased 160 million over the next 5 years, and so you break that down per year. What we will be doing with that funding, and again, a lot of this funding, as I mentioned, the buckets that I just talked about, we're receiving increases in allocations, but there is direction on how you are to use that money. It is not just use it however you want. It is directed towards, the bridge program, to EV, to resiliency, to carbon reduction. And with our federal allocation here, we do need to use this money again, and as we should be, increasing our highway safety program. So as you all know, we have line items throughout the CTP for the hazard elimination program, for traffic calming, for intersection improvements, for the highway safety improvement program, the HSIP program. All of those line items will be increased with this new allocation. And then we are going to be able to advance some of the projects that I have listed here that were already scheduled in our outer years, but we're going to be able to advance them earlier to be able to start work on them earlier. And then obviously all of our projects have increased in cost over time. And so the allocation is used to basically make up the cost difference there. And then lastly, our FTA formula on the transit side, again, it's that about 56.5 million that we'll see over the next 5 years. So about $11 million of increase that you'll see. One project that was specifically identified was the Wilmington DTC maintenance building. We're going to be advancing that. You'll see the increase in line items for the technology enhancements and microtransit. This is something, microtransit is something that we're piloting right now through a federal grant down in the Georgetown to Millsboro area. If it has been successful so far, it started last April. It's going for, I believe, another year. And so we want to look at potentially expanding that type of service statewide and so other areas. And then of course, our efforts to increase the amount of zero emission buses that we have throughout our fleet, that and the infrastructure, that will be a main focus of the increase in funding. So Mr. Chair, I know that was a lot of information and I'm happy to take any additional comments on that before you all consider the draft 23 to 28 CTP for a vote.
Madam Secretary, I have a question.
Sure.
The electric vehicle, you said the motor fuel tax was going up slowly. You showed that slide and then you talked about the electric vehicles. Is there going to be some kind of tax to offset the loss in motor vehicle tax fees that we get at the pump?
At this point, there is nothing that's being proposed for that, but I think that it's a balance because we of course want to reduce emissions. We understand that transportation is the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions, and we want to do everything we can to reduce emissions and have more fuel efficient vehicles and have an increase in electric vehicles. That's all great. And then the flip side of that is how do we still have the investment in our transportation infrastructure, because these electric cars still weigh the same as they do as a gas powered car. So I think you're going to see an increase in conversations going forward about exactly how we do that. But at this stage, there is not a proposal for any type of electric vehicle fee.
Good.
Just be a follow-up on that, Madam Secretary. I know there was a study from the I-95 Coalition doing the vehicles miles traveled, and I've heard nothing about it over the last, maybe 18 months or so. Is that coalition still having a discussion about furthering that kind of discussion about doing the vehicles miles traveled or some other means?
Yes, it is actually. And actually part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there was funding specifically to actually expand the mileage-based user fee pilot and make it more kind of I want to say across the country, because right now, as you know, it really was Delaware and Pennsylvania, and then New Jersey, North Carolina, a few other states have started to come on board to look at the different options of it. And so we do expect there to be more of a focus on exploring the different options of a mileage-based user fee or a highway user fee or something, and how do electric vehicles that obviously are not contributing to the gas tax, how do they contribute and how do they factor into all of this? So we anticipate more to come with the passage of this bill, the creation of a larger pilot, and have more states involved in it. So more to come on that.
I do know, Madam Secretary, that we didn't get our package of this information on the update to the CTP, which included that additional funding until I think maybe Monday of this week. I know that might have been caused by you guys getting direction on how to do the infrastructure spending package. I would suggest that you might be able to try to get that to us just a little bit sooner so that all members would have an opportunity to take a look at that.
Yes, I apologize for that. And as you indicated, I think that a member of our team is on a webinar with USDOT every single day on trying to get more information on exactly how the funding breakdown is and how we can use the funding. It's a constant moving operation. And so We apologize for getting it to you late, but yes, it's literally just a matter of us trying to figure out exactly where all the line items could be and what's eligible and what's not.
Question that I have, with all this additional funding, are we going to have projects that are going to be ready fairly quickly for the contracting community? Because I know that's one of the questions they always ask, and they ask me when they see me about that type of idea of things moving a little bit faster for them.
Yeah, so we have quarterly meetings with the Delaware Contractors Association to update them on what our anticipated bid schedule is. We do have a lot of work that is coming. One of the things I would say that there are two issues that would end up delaying a project. We want to make sure we obviously have all the right of way and right of way issues worked out before we turn a project over to a contractor. So we may have had, some right of way delays, but I will say one of the other bigger issues is utility relocation. So every single project that we do has some sort of utility relocation. And the coordination between the utility companies and us and our contractors is vital. And we want to make sure that all the utility relocation is really done before we hand a project over to a contractor, because we don't want the contractor to start and then have to stop because lines and poles have not been moved. So we the General Assembly passed legislation to create a utility coordination council, which I'm happy to say that legislation passed this last year. We have been able to get that council to meet, and it's a representative of all the major utility companies in the state and us, and really working on, we are providing the schedule to them, what are the resources that they need in order to be able to keep up with the amount of work that we have coming. And how can we improve coordination and communication with them? And so we're excited about the fact that we have this council, that we are working to improve that coordination with them. We actually had our utility summit earlier in this week. But those are the two real factors in determining when we can have a project go to bid for the contractor. So if we've had delays, it's been on those two things. But again, we are working with the utility companies. We are willing to provide whatever resources that we can to them in order to get all the lines moved before we start construction. So we have not gotten any indication from the contracting community that they have any concerns with not being able to keep up with the amount of work that we have out there. I think what's been great to see is I think you all recall this last year, we had a significant increase in the amount of money for suburban streets through the Community Transportation Fund. And we are administrating about 6 different contracts now to do those work statewide. So it's pave and rehab work, really statewide. We've gotten 6 bidders for each of those, each time we've gone out to bid. So the resources are there. So it's not, even on our larger scale projects that we've gone out to bid, we've been getting multiple bidders. So that's a great sign. That shows that the contracting community is ready to do all this work.
Thank you. Do any of the members of the council have any questions on the presentation of the CTP before I entertain a motion to approve? Seeing and hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the 2023-2020 eight. Went blank there for a second. The 2023-2028 capital transportation plan.
So moved, Ted.
Okay, Mr. Gilbert, can I have a second, please?
Second.
Mr. Viper, thank you. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a vote on the 2023-2028 capital transportation plan. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. We'll sign the letter, Madam Secretary, so you can forward it on to the governor's office.
Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate your help and your support.
Thank you. Now I'll move on to public comment. I don't think we have any from the public in the present here in the room. Do we have any virtually that would like to ask a question or have a comment?
So just a reminder for those that are participating virtually, you can raise your hand and we can and be able to ask the question.
You see anybody, Todd?
I'm not seeing anything. I don't
It
see
appears
anybody.
it appears we don't have anybody from the public that would like to make from the virtually comment. With that, I'm going to entertain a motion for our meeting unless some members of the council have anything else I'd like to discuss before we do that. Hearing none, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Pam Scott.
Second.
Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary and members of staff.
Thank you all very much.